The year was 1885, and the Montana Territory stretched endlessly under a pewter sky that promised snow. In the distance, a train's lonely whistle echoed through the mountain valleys, carrying with it the dreams and desperation of those brave enough, or desperate enough, to venture into the untamed wilderness of the American West. This is the story of a woman who lost everything she thought she wanted, only to discover everything she truly needed. It's a tale of courage born from necessity, of love found in the most unexpected places, and of the fierce determination that lives within the human heart when pushed to its very limits. Some journeys begin with careful planning and bright hopes. Others start with 17 cents, a crumpled letter, and the cold realization that the life you've been living was never really your own. Eleanor Rosewood's journey began with the latter, a fall from grace that would become the first step toward a freedom she never knew existed. In an age when women were expected to be seen and not heard, to submit and never question, Eleanor would discover that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply choosing to live on your own terms. Her story unfolds against the backdrop of Cedar Falls, a rough frontier town where survival demanded everything you had and gave back only what you earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. The train's wheels screamed against the metal tracks like a wounded animal as Elena Rosewood pressed her face to the frost-covered window, watching her old life disappear into the gray October morning. Her fingers clutched the letter that had shattered her world, the paper soft and worn from being read 100 times. Each word burned into her memory like a brand. Our marriage was a mistake. Do not try to find me. You are no longer welcome in Philadelphia. V. Ashford, 17 cents. That's all she had left after buying the one-way ticket to nowhere. The other passengers whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes taking in her wrinkled traveling dress and red-rimmed eyes with the cruel satisfaction of those watching someone else's misfortune. A woman traveling alone could only mean one thing: scandal. "Next stop, Cedar Falls," the conductor called out, his voice cutting through her thoughts like a blade. End of the line, end of the line, how perfectly fitting. Elena gathered her small carpet bag, containing everything she owned in the world, and stepped onto the wooden platform. The November wind cut through her thin coat like ice, making her teeth chatter as she looked around at what would have to become home. Cedar Falls wasn't much to look at. A handful of weathered buildings lined a dusty main street that looked like it might blow away in the next strong wind. The mountains rose around the valley like stone sentinels, their peaks already crowned with snow that caught the pale afternoon light. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, nothing like the manicured gardens and gas-lit streets of Philadelphia. Here, nature ruled with an iron fist, and humans survived only if they learned to bend without breaking. Her stomach growled loudly enough to draw stares from the few people on the platform. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had become strange since Victor had thrown her out of their home, hours stretching like years while days passed in a blur of hurt and confusion. The general store sat at the corner of Main Street, its crooked sign reading Mills General Goods in faded paint. Elena pushed through the door, setting off a brass bell that announced her arrival to a thin man with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. "Help you?" Jasper Mills asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not help anyone, especially not a desperate-looking woman with city clothes and empty pockets. Elena's cheeks burned with shame, but desperation gave her courage. "I'm looking for work. Any kind of work." Mills laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Work? Lady, do you see where you are? This ain't some fancy city where ladies play at having jobs. Women here either got husbands or they got nothing. Which one are you?" Before Elena could answer, the bell rang again. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor behind her, and she felt someone's presence like warmth at her back. "Mills, you got any of that good coffee left?" a deep voice asked. The voice sounded tired but kind, like distant thunder that promised rain to thirsty ground. "Sure do, Marcus. But I got me a situation here first." Mills nodded toward Elena like she was a problem that needed solving. "This lady wants work." Elena finally turned around. The man standing behind her was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and hands that spoke of hard, honest labor. His clothes were clean but mended, his boots worn but well cared for. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Storm gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "What kind of work?" he asked, looking directly at Elena, instead of talking around her like she was invisible. "Anything," Elena whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I can cook, clean, keep books. I learn quickly." Mills snorted. "She's got city written all over her, Marcus. Probably never worked a day in her life." The man, Marcus, ignored Mills completely. He studied Elena's face with the intensity of someone reading a fascinating book, seeing things others missed. "I'm Marcus Stone," he said quietly. "I run a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Just lost my housekeeper last month. Job comes with room and board, fair wages. Works hard but honest." Elena's heart leaped like a bird trying to escape a cage. "I'm Elena Rosewood, and yes, I'll take it." "Hold on there," Mills interrupted, his voice sharp with warning. "Marcus, you sure about this? That woman's running from something. Mark my words. Probably husband trouble." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Every person in this territory is running from something, Mills. Question is whether they're running towards something better or just running scared." He looked at Elena again. "Which one are you?" Elena thought about Victor's cold dismissal, about the Philadelphia mansion that had felt like a beautiful prison, about the so-called friends who had abandoned her the moment scandal touched her name. She thought about the wedding ring she'd sold for train fare and the future that stretched ahead like an empty page waiting to be written. "I'm running towards something better," she said, and for the first time in weeks, she meant it. Marcus nodded slowly. "Good. We'll leave in an hour. That enough time to get your things?" Elena held up her small bag. "This is everything I have." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Understanding, maybe, or compassion. She hoped it wasn't pity. As they left Mill's store and walked toward Marcus's wagon, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile as spun glass and just as likely to shatter, but it was real. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she was moving towards something instead of just away from the wreckage of her old life. The wagon wheels began to turn, carrying her toward an uncertain future. But as the buildings of Cedar Falls fell behind them and the vast Montana landscape opened ahead, Elena Rosewood felt the first stirrings of what it might mean to be truly free. The journey to Marcus Stone's ranch took them along a winding mountain road that climbed steadily through stands of towering pine and aspen trees whose golden leaves danced in the crisp autumn air. Elena had never seen country like this, wild and vast and empty of the sounds that had filled her Philadelphia life. No clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones, no rumble of carriages, no constant hum of city voices. Here the only sounds were wind in the trees, the creak of wagon wheels, and the steady breathing of the horses. "You afraid of hard work?" Marcus asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I don't know," Elena answered honestly. "I've never done any." Marcus pulled the horses to a stop and turned to look at her. "Never done any hard work? Not ever." Elena's cheeks burned with embarrassment. My former husband, didn't believe wives should work. I spent my days reading, doing needlework, planning dinner parties, useless things." "Reading isn't useless," Marcus said firmly. "Can you do numbers, keep books?" "Yes, I managed all our household accounts." "Good. My last housekeeper, Isabella, was hopeless with numbers. Nearly got me in trouble with the bank twice." Marcus clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving again. "What about your family? Won't they worry when you don't come home?" Elena stared at her hands folded in her lap. "My parents died when I was 16. Victor was all the family I had." She looked up at the mountains, their peaks already touched with snow. "He made sure I knew that, made sure I understood how grateful I should be." "Grateful for what?" "For being chosen, for having a place, for not being alone." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Funny how quickly gratitude turns into a cage. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My Isabella used to say that about her first marriage. Said her first husband made her feel like a pet he kept around for decoration. Isabella was your wife? Marcus's face changed, becoming both gentler and sadder at the same time. My wife. She died last spring. Elena felt her stomach drop. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No reason you should, Marcus said, pointing ahead where the road crested a hill. There's the ranch. The valley spread out below them like something from a dream. Rolling grassland crossed by a silver stream that caught the afternoon sunlight, dotted with cattle that looked like dark specks from this distance. In the center of it all stood a white farmhouse with a red roof, surrounded by barns and corrals, and a garden gone wild with late-season flowers. It's beautiful, Elena breathed. Isabella thought so too, Marcus said, his voice catching slightly. Said it looked like a place where good things could grow. They drove down into the valley as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The air smelled different here, clean and sharp, like pine needles and snow and something Elena couldn't name. Maybe possibility. As they got closer to the house, Elena could see it needed work. The porch sagged slightly on one side, paint peeled from the shutters, and the garden was a tangle of weeds and overgrown roses. But the bones were good. Solid walls, a straight roof, windows that would let in the morning light. House hasn't had a woman's touch in months, Marcus said, sounding embarrassed. I'm better with cattle than I am with cleaning. A big yellow dog came bounding around the corner of the house, barking and wagging his tail at the same time. That's Scout, Marcus said, climbing down from the wagon. He's friendly, but not too bright. Don't let him in the house or he'll eat everything, including the furniture. Elena climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the long ride. Scout sniffed her hands and decided she was acceptable, giving her wet dog kisses that made her laugh, despite her nervousness. When did you last laugh? Marcus asked, watching her pet the dog. Elena stopped mid-laugh, surprised by the question. I don't remember. That's a shame. You have a nice laugh. The inside of the house was even more neglected than the outside. Dust covered every surface, dishes sat piled in the kitchen sink, and clothes lay scattered across chairs. It looked like a place where someone had given up trying. This was Isabella's domain, Marcus said, looking around the messy kitchen with sad eyes. I haven't known what to do with it since she died. Elena walked to the window over the kitchen sink and looked out at the garden. Even overgrown and wild, she could see the planning that had gone into it. Vegetables near the house for easy picking, herbs by the kitchen door, flowers arranged by color and height. She was a gardener, Elena said, best in the territory, could grow anything anywhere. Said the secret was paying attention to what each plant needed instead of trying to make them all the same. Elena touched a dusty jar on the windowsill. It was filled with seeds, beans maybe, or squash. May I work in the garden when I have time? Marcus looked surprised. You know about gardening. No, but I'd like to learn. Elena picked up the seed jar and held it up to the light. Isabella was right. Different things need different care. Maybe that's true for people too. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Maybe it is. He showed her through the rest of the house, the front room with its big stone fireplace, the bedroom that would be hers, the little office where he kept his ranch records in complete chaos. Everything was covered in dust and neglect, but Elena could see the love that had once lived here. Isabella decorated it all, Marcus said as they climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. I wanted to buy everything new, but she said a house should grow around the people who live in it, not be imposed on them. Elena's room was small but bright, with windows facing east toward the mountains. A simple bed, a chest of drawers, a chair by the window, clean and spare, but somehow welcoming. There are quilts in the chest, Marcus said. Nights get cold up here, even in fall. After he left, Elena sat on the bed and tried to understand what had happened to her life. This morning she had been a homeless woman with 17 cents and no future. Now she had a job, a room, and something that felt almost like hope. She opened the chest and found quilts that smelled like lavender and sunshine. As she shook one out to put on the bed, a piece of paper fell to the floor. Elena picked it up and saw it was a note written in elegant handwriting. Welcome, whoever you are. This room has been waiting for someone who needs it. Be kind to Marcus. He's hurting more than he shows. The garden knows all the secrets if you listen. Isabella. Elena read the note 3 times before she understood. Isabella had left it for whoever came after her, like she had known someone would need this place, this room, this chance to start over. Outside her window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of roses. In the distance, she could hear Marcus calling the cattle home for the night, his voice carrying across the valley like a song. For the first time since Victor had thrown her away, Elena felt like she might belong somewhere. Dawn came with a rooster's crow that could wake the dead. Elena stumbled from bed, her body stiff from the unfamiliar mattress and the long wagon ride. Through her window, she could see Marcus already moving around the barn, a lantern in his hand creating a pool of golden light in the purple darkness. She dressed quickly and hurried to the kitchen, where coffee sat ready on the stove. Marcus must have made it before heading out to his morning chores. The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed her more than the hot liquid itself. "Elena," Marcus's voice carried across the yard. "Come meet the ladies." She found him in the chicken coop, a structure that smelled of hay and something else she couldn't identify. Hens clucked and fluttered around his feet as he scattered grain from a bucket. "Ladies, meet Elena," he announced solemnly. "She's going to be gathering your eggs from now on, so you'd best behave yourselves." "You talk to the chickens?" Elena asked, amused despite her nervousness. "Why not? They're good listeners and they never argue back, unlike some animals I could mention." He glanced toward the pasture where a magnificent black horse stood watching them, ears pricked forward as if he understood every word. "That's Storm," Marcus said. "Smartest horse I've ever known, but he's got opinions about everything. Isabella used to say he was more like a grumpy old man than a horse." Marcus showed her how to reach under the hens for eggs, warning her that some of the birds were broody and would peck at intruders. Her first attempt resulted in a sharp pain across her knuckles and an indignant squawk from a red hen who clearly considered the eggs her personal property. "She got you good," Marcus observed, examining the scratch. "That's Duchess. She's the boss around here, and she wants everyone to know it." Elena found herself laughing, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. When had she last laughed with Victor? She couldn't remember. The morning brought lesson after lesson. How to milk the 2 cows without getting kicked. How to pump water from the well without straining her back. How to feed the horses while keeping her fingers safely away from their teeth. Each task revealed how little she knew about the basic work of staying alive. In Philadelphia, servants had handled everything from cooking to cleaning to shopping. Elena's biggest daily decision had been which dress to wear to which social event. "Don't look so defeated," Marcus said, finding her struggling with the butter churn after lunch. "Nobody expects you to learn everything in one day. Ranch life is different from city life, but it's not harder, just different." "I don't understand the difference," Elena admitted, her arms aching from the rhythmic motion of churning. Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, considering her question. "In the city, you depend on other people for everything. Out here, you depend on yourself, your family, and your neighbors. When something breaks, you fix it. When you're hungry, you cook. When winter comes, you'd better have enough food stored up to last until spring. What if you can't do something? What if you don't know how? Then you learn or you trade work with someone who does know. Mrs. Henderson down the valley makes the best bread in 3 counties, but she can't shoe a horse to save her life. So she trades loaves for horseshoeing, and everybody wins." Elena thought about this as she finally achieved something that might generously be called butter. In Philadelphia, if she'd needed something, she'd simply purchased it. The idea of trading skills and labor seemed both foreign and appealing. That afternoon, Marcus took her to meet the cattle up close. The massive animals proved surprisingly gentle, allowing her to approach and even touch their warm sides. A calf with white spots wandered over to investigate her skirts, its rough tongue nearly knocking her over when it decided to taste the fabric. "They're like big dogs," Elena marveled, stroking the calf's soft nose. "Don't let them hear you say that. They've got their pride." As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Elena helped Marcus with the evening chores. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, and her dress was stained with things she preferred not to identify. But she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the deep satisfaction of useful work. You did well today, Marcus said as they walked back to the house together. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. Did you think I'd give up and demand to be taken back to town? The thought crossed my mind. City ladies usually don't take to ranch life. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him in the gathering darkness. I'm not a city lady anymore, Marcus. I don't know what I am yet, but I know what I'm not. He studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the kitchen window. What are you then? I'm a woman with blisters on her hands and dirt under her fingernails who managed to get 3 eggs from Duchess without losing any blood. That's more than I was yesterday. Marcus smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. That's a good start, Elena. That's a very good start. The weeks that followed brought new challenges and small victories. Elena learned to read the signs that meant a storm was coming, the way the horses grew restless, how the cattle gathered in sheltered spots, the particular smell in the air that promised snow. She mastered the art of keeping the kitchen fire burning all day, of planning meals that would stretch their supplies, of mending clothes with neat, careful stitches. More importantly, she learned to read Marcus. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was worried about money, how he stood a little straighter when he was proud of something, the careful way he spoke Isabella's name, like it was made of glass that might shatter if handled roughly. And Marcus learned to read Elena too. He noticed when she was trying too hard to prove herself, when the weight of learning everything at once threatened to overwhelm her. He discovered that she had a quick mind for numbers and an eye for detail that helped her spot problems he might have missed. You're good at this, he said one evening as they reviewed the ranch's account books by lamplight. You ask questions I wouldn't think to ask. Like what? Like why we're spending so much on feed when we've got good pasture. Like whether it would be cheaper to buy a bull rather than paying stud fees every year. Marcus looked up from the ledger. Isabella was hopeless with numbers. Good with everything else, but hopeless with numbers. Elena felt a warm glow of pride. In Philadelphia, her intelligence had been something to hide. Victor had made it clear that men didn't like wives who were too smart. Here, Marcus seemed to value her thoughts and opinions. 1 month after her arrival, Elena realized she hadn't thought about Victor in 3 whole days. When she did remember him, it was with a mixture of pity and gratitude. Pity for the man who had been too small to recognize what he had, and gratitude that his cruelty had forced her to discover her own strength. That night, as she lay in Isabella's bed under quilts that now smelled like her own lavender soap, Elena felt something she had never experienced before, the quiet contentment of being exactly where she belonged. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, delivered by a rider whose expensive clothes and nervous manner marked him as someone unused to frontier life. Elena was hanging laundry when she saw him approach, and something about the way he avoided eye contact made her stomach clench with dread. Mrs. Rosewood, he asked, though her name came out like a question. I have a delivery for you. The envelope bore the seal of Ashford and Associates, Victor's law firm, and Elena's hands trembled as she broke the wax. The message inside was brief but devastating. Elena, your disgraceful behavior has come to my attention. A wife's place is with her husband, not playing house with strange men in uncivilized territories. I am prepared to overlook your momentary madness if you return immediately. However, if you persist in this embarrassing charade, I will have no choice but to take legal action to protect both our reputations. The law is quite clear about a wife's obligations. V. Ashford. Elena read the letter twice before its full meaning sank in. Victor knew where she was. More than that, he was threatening legal action, and in 1885, the law gave husbands almost unlimited power over their wives. A woman could be forced to return to her husband regardless of her wishes, her feelings, or even her safety. She was still standing frozen in the yard when Marcus returned from checking the fence lines, Storm's hoofbeats announcing his approach. One look at her face told him something was wrong. What is it? He asked, dismounting quickly. Elena handed him the letter without a word. She watched his face darken as he read, his jaw clenching with barely controlled anger. When did this arrive? Just now. A man brought it. Expensive clothes. City manner. He asked questions about the ranch, about you. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the afternoon sun. Victor knows where I am. He knows about you. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his movements controlled but dangerous. Let him come. This is Montana territory, not some drawing room in Philadelphia. Out here, a man's word means something, and so does a woman's right to choose her own path. But Elena had lived too long under Victor's control to share Marcus's confidence. She knew how persuasive her husband could be, how skillfully he wielded social pressure and legal threats. In Philadelphia, Victor Ashford was a man of influence, with connections that reached far beyond the city limits. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Victor doesn't make idle threats. If he says he'll take legal action, he means it. And the law—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The law treated women like property, and married women had even fewer rights than their unmarried sisters. That evening, they were interrupted during dinner by the sound of wagon wheels in the yard. Marcus rose immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that hung above the fireplace. "Stay inside," he told Elena, but she followed him to the window instead. Three men climbed down from an elegant black carriage that looked absurdly out of place against the rustic backdrop of the ranch. Elena's blood turned to ice as she recognized the tall figure in the expensive overcoat. Victor Ashford had come to take her home. He looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who had never doubted his right to get exactly what he wanted. The two men with him were strangers, but their bearings suggested they were accustomed to enforcing Victor's will. "Elena, darling," Victor called out, his voice carrying the cultured tones of Philadelphia society. "I've come to take you home where you belong." Marcus stepped onto the porch, his presence solid and reassuring between Elena and the men who had come to claim her. "The lady doesn't want to go with you." Victor's smile was cold as winter wind. "I'm afraid what the lady wants is irrelevant, Mr. Stone. Elena is my wife, legally and morally bound to me until death do us part. Surely even in this rustic environment, you understand the sanctity of marriage vows?" "I understand that vows work both ways," Marcus replied steadily. "A husband has obligations too." "Indeed he does, which is why I'm here to fulfill my obligation to protect my wife from making foolish decisions that will ruin her reputation permanently." Victor's gaze found Elena through the window, and his smile sharpened. "Come out, my dear. Let's settle this like civilized people." Elena's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to walk outside. She would not cower behind Marcus like a frightened child. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity. "Victor," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "I received your letter. Then you understand why I'm here. This little adventure has gone on long enough. You've made your point about being independent, but it's time to come home and be sensible." "I am being sensible. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely sensible." Victor's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "Elena, you're being ridiculous. Look around you. This place is barely civilized. You're living in sin with a man you barely know, doing manual labor like a common servant. Is this really what you want? To throw away everything we built together for this?" "We didn't build anything together, Victor. You built a life that suited you, and I was expected to be grateful for the privilege of decorating it." "That's enough," Victor snapped, his facade cracking completely. "I've been patient with your hysterics, but my patience has limits. You're coming home with me tonight, willingly or otherwise." "No," Elena said simply. "I'm not." Victor gestured to his companions, and Elena realized with growing horror that one of them wore a badge, a territorial marshal, here to enforce Victor's legal claim to his wayward wife. "Mrs. Ashford," the marshal said, his voice apologetic but firm, "I'm sorry, but the law's clear. A wife's place is with her husband. I have papers here authorizing me to escort you back to Philadelphia." Marcus stepped forward, his face dangerous. "What papers?" The marshal produced a leather folder thick with official-looking documents. "Writ of habeas corpus, signed by a federal judge. Mrs. Ashford is to be returned to her husband's custody immediately." Elena felt the world tilt sideways. She had known this moment might come, but the reality of it was more devastating than she had imagined. All her newfound strength, all her hard-won independence, meant nothing against the weight of laws written by men who viewed women as property to be owned and controlled. "I'll go," she said quietly, before Marcus could protest. "Just Give me a few minutes to gather my things. Elena, no, Marcus said, but she could hear the defeat in his voice. He was a good man, an honorable man, but he couldn't fight the entire legal system of the United States. It's all right, she told him, though nothing was all right and might never be all right again. This isn't your fight. But as she turned toward the house, Marcus caught her arm. Yes, it is, he said quietly. It became my fight the day you chose to stay. And I'm not giving up without a fight. The determination in his voice sent a spark of hope through Elena's despair. Maybe the law was on Victor's side, but they were in Montana territory now, where different rules applied, where a person's worth was measured by their character rather than their connections, and where sometimes justice mattered more than legality. The battle for Elena's freedom was just beginning. The confrontation that would determine Elena's fate began at dawn the next morning, when the entire population of Cedar Falls seemed to converge on the Stone Creek Ranch. Word had spread overnight through the tight-knit community, the way news always traveled in small towns. And by sunrise, wagons and riders were arriving to witness what everyone understood would be more than just a legal dispute. This was a test of what kind of place they wanted Cedar Falls to be. Dr. Harrison arrived first, his medical bag in hand, claiming he needed to check on Elena's health, but really there to offer his support. Mrs. Henderson came with fresh bread and a fierce determination to speak her mind about men who abandoned their wives and then demanded their return. Even old Jake Morrison rode over, grumbling about the early hour but positioning himself squarely behind Marcus and Elena. Victor emerged from the hotel looking every inch the sophisticated Philadelphia gentleman, his legal papers clutched in one perfectly manicured hand. But Elena could see something in his eyes she had never noticed before. Uncertainty. He had expected to collect his wayward wife like a piece of misplaced luggage, not to face an entire community that seemed prepared to challenge his claim. This is ridiculous, Victor announced to the growing crowd. This is a private matter between a husband and wife. These people have no business interfering. Maybe not in Philadelphia, said a new voice from the back of the crowd. But out here, we believe in giving people a chance to speak for themselves. Elena's heart leaped as she recognized the speaker. Judge William Carter, the territorial circuit judge who rode from town to town dispensing frontier justice. He was a man with silver hair and keen blue eyes, who had a reputation for fairness that stretched across 3 counties. Your Honor, Victor said, immediately shifting into the smooth legal manner that had served him so well in Philadelphia courtrooms. I have federal papers ordering the return of my wife. This is a simple matter of law. Judge Carter examined the documents with the careful attention of a man who had seen every legal trick attempted in his courtroom. These papers seem to be in order, he said finally. But I'm curious about something, Mr. Ashford. What exactly are you accusing your wife of? What crime has she committed that requires federal intervention? Victor's confident smile faltered slightly. Crime? She's committed no crime, Your Honor. She's simply confused, emotional. You know how women can be. A dangerous murmur ran through the crowd at those words. Elena noticed that several of the women present, strong frontier wives who had carved homes out of wilderness, looked ready to give Victor Ashford a demonstration of exactly how women could be. I see, Judge Carter said mildly. So you're asking me to use federal authority to force a woman to return to a marriage she apparently doesn't want to continue, based on your belief that she's too emotional to make her own decisions? The law clearly states, I know what the law states, Mr. Ashford. The question is whether justice is served by blindly following that law in this particular case. The judge turned to Elena. Mrs. Ashford, would you care to tell me why you left Philadelphia? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the crowd focused on her. In Philadelphia, she had never been allowed to speak for herself in any matter of importance. Men had always spoken for her, about her, around her, but never with her as an equal participant in her own life. Your Honor, she began, her voice shaking slightly, I left because my husband wrote me a letter telling me our marriage was a mistake and that I was no longer welcome in our home. He gave me $50 and told me to make arrangements for my future elsewhere. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the story Victor had been telling. Do you have this letter? Judge Carter asked. Elena's heart sank. No, Your Honor. I... I destroyed it. I was so hurt and angry. How convenient, Victor said smoothly. Your Honor, my wife has clearly fabricated this story to justify her abandonment of her marital duties. I never wrote any such letter. Perhaps not, Judge Carter said thoughtfully, but I find it interesting that you haven't denied the substance of what she's claiming. Did you or did you not ask your wife to leave your home? Victor's face flushed red. That was a temporary arrangement. Business pressures, you understand. Sometimes a man needs time to think. So you did tell her to leave? Temporarily. I never intended for her to run off to the wilderness like some kind of pioneer woman. Elena felt something spark inside her chest. A flame of anger that burned away her fear. You told me I was a disappointment, she said, her voice growing stronger. You said you regretted marrying me. You said I was boring and that you couldn't bear the sight of me anymore. You gave me money and told me to disappear from your life. Elena, you're being hysterical. I'm being honest. The words burst out of her with years of suppressed frustration behind them. For 8 years, I tried to be the perfect wife you wanted. I made myself smaller and quieter and more invisible every day, hoping that somehow I could earn your love. But nothing I did was ever enough, because the problem wasn't me. It was that you never wanted a wife. You wanted a decoration for your dining room. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Elena could feel their attention like a physical weight, but for the first time in her life, she didn't care what others thought. The truth was pouring out of her like water through a broken dam, and she couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. You want to talk about law and duty and marriage vows? She continued, turning to face Victor directly. What about your vows? What about your duty to love and cherish me? When did you last ask about my happiness? When did you last treat me as anything more than a burden you had to carry? Victor's face had gone white with rage. That's enough. Your Honor, my wife is clearly having some kind of breakdown. She needs proper medical care, not encouragement in these delusions. But Judge Carter was studying Elena with new interest. Mrs. Ashford, what do you want? If you could choose freely, what would you choose? Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. Dr. Harrison nodding encouragingly, Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, Marcus standing tall and steady behind her, like an anchor in a storm. These people had become her community, her chosen family, in a way that Philadelphia society never had. I want to stay here, she said simply. I want to continue building a life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can do for someone else. I want to work with my hands and use my mind and make decisions about my own future. I want to be free. Freedom, Victor laughed bitterly. You call this freedom? Living in a shack, doing manual labor, degrading yourself with a man who's nothing more than a common rancher? Elena, you were meant for better things than this. I was meant for happiness, Elena replied, and I've found more happiness in 3 months here than I found in 8 years in Philadelphia. Judge Carter had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of a man weighing lives in his hands. Now he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of the territorial court. Mr. Ashford, your federal papers may be technically valid, but I have some concerns about their basis. You're asking me to force a woman to return to a marriage where she claims to have been emotionally abandoned and then physically ejected from her home. That doesn't sound like a marriage worth preserving. Your Honor, surely you can't take the word of an emotional woman over legal documents? I can, and I will, Judge Carter said firmly, especially when that woman's account is supported by your own admissions. You've confirmed that you did tell her to leave, that you did give her money to go away. A man can't abandon his wife and then claim abandonment when she takes him at his word. Victor's confident facade was cracking like ice in spring. This is preposterous. I have rights. Legal rights. You do indeed, but so does she. Judge Carter turned back to Elena. Mrs. Ashford, are you asking this court to grant you a divorce on the grounds of desertion and cruelty? Elena's heart stopped. In 1885, divorce was scandalous, difficult, and socially devastating for women. But it was also freedom. Yes, Your Honor, I am. The words rang out across the silent crowd like a bell tolling. Victor's face went from white to purple with rage. You can't be serious. Elena, think about what you're doing. You'll be ruined. No decent person will associate with a divorced woman. Then I'll associate with indecent people, Elena said calmly, the kind who judge others by their character rather than their legal status. Judge Carter smiled for the first time that morning. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to give you a choice. You can contest this divorce proceeding and drag both yourself and your wife through a lengthy legal battle that will expose all the intimate details of your marriage to public scrutiny. Or you can agree to an uncontested divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, allowing both of you to move forward with your lives. Victor looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him, at the community that had clearly chosen Elena's side over his. His Philadelphia connections and legal maneuvering meant nothing here, where people valued substance over style and actions over appearances. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice tight with defeat and rage. "Elena, you'll regret this. When winter comes and you're struggling to survive in this godforsaken wilderness, remember that you chose this hardship over the comfort I offered you." "I will remember," Elena said quietly, "and I'll be grateful every day that I had the courage to choose myself over your version of comfort." Victor climbed back into his carriage without another word, his legal papers worthless as scrap in the face of frontier justice and community solidarity. As the elegant vehicle rolled away toward town, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Judge Carter approached her with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Ashford, or perhaps I should say, Miss Rosewood again, it will take a few weeks to process the paperwork, but you're free, legally and officially free." Elena burst into tears then, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Marcus stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, and she felt the solid warmth of his embrace anchor her to this new reality. "What happens now?" she asked when she could speak again. Marcus looked down at her with eyes full of love and possibility. "Now you get to choose. You get to decide what kind of life you want to build and who you want to build it with." Elena looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbors, at the mountains that surrounded her chosen valley, at the man whose steady strength had helped her discover her own courage. "I choose this," she said firmly. "I choose all of this." 6 months later, on a perfect May morning, when the mountain wildflowers painted the valley in shades of purple and gold, Elena Rosewood became Elena Stone, in a ceremony that bore no resemblance to her first wedding. There was no cathedral with stained glass windows, no orchestra playing classical music, no society guests in expensive gowns judging every detail. Instead, there was sunshine and laughter, and the sweet smell of Isabella's garden in full bloom. A garden that Elena had spent the winter learning to tend with careful hands and patient love. The ceremony took place on the front porch of the ranch house, which Marcus had spent weeks repairing and painting until it looked fresh and welcoming. Dr. Harrison performed the service, having been ordained as a minister years earlier, when frontier communities needed men who could serve multiple roles. Mrs. Henderson had made Elena's dress, simple white cotton with blue ribbons that matched the color of the Montana sky. The only jewelry she wore was her mother's silver locket, the one precious thing that truly belonged to her. But the most beautiful part of the ceremony wasn't the setting or the dress or even the words they spoke to each other. It was the look in Marcus's eyes as he promised to love and cherish her, not as a possession to be owned, but as a partner to be treasured. When Elena spoke her own vows, promising to stand beside him as an equal in all things, she meant every word with a depth of conviction that surprised even her. The kiss that sealed their marriage tasted like hope and smelled like roses. When they broke apart, the small gathering of neighbors and friends erupted in cheers that echoed off the mountains and sent a flock of birds spiraling up into the endless blue sky. The reception was held in the barn, which the community had decorated with wildflowers and lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Mrs. Martinez brought her famous tamales, the Hendersons contributed fresh bread and butter, and old Jake Morrison surprised everyone by producing a fiddle and playing dance tunes with the skill of a much younger man. Elena danced with her new husband as the sun set behind the mountains, feeling lighter than air and more grounded than she had ever been. This was what marriage was supposed to feel like, not a cage or a performance, but a celebration of two people choosing to build something beautiful together. "Any regrets?" Marcus whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. Elena thought about her old life in Philadelphia, with its empty luxury and suffocating expectations. She thought about Victor, probably remarried by now to some other woman who would learn to make herself small enough to fit in his narrow world. She thought about the path that had led her here, paved with heartbreak and rejection and 17 cents worth of desperation. Only one, she said, smiling up at her husband. I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to choose happiness over security. Their first year of marriage brought challenges that tested their partnership in ways neither had expected. A drought that summer withered half their crops and forced them to sell cattle earlier than planned. Elena's attempts at preserving vegetables resulted in several jars that exploded spectacularly in the root cellar, filling the house with the smell of fermented beets for weeks. Marcus caught pneumonia during a late blizzard and spent 2 weeks in bed while Elena learned to handle the ranch work alone, her hands cracking from cold and her back aching from hauling water and feed. But they also had their triumphs. Elena's careful bookkeeping helped them secure a loan to improve their irrigation system. Her correspondence with agricultural colleges back east brought new ideas about crop rotation and soil conservation that increased their yields. Marcus taught her to ride storm, and by autumn she could check fence lines and herd cattle almost as well as any cowhand. More importantly, they learned to be married in the truest sense, not just sharing a name and a house, but creating a true partnership where decisions were made together and burdens were shared equally. When Elena suggested they build a small schoolhouse on their property to educate the scattered ranch children, Marcus not only agreed, but helped her write letters to the Territorial Education Department requesting books and supplies. The news that would change their lives forever came on a snowy February morning, delivered by Elena herself as she stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Marcus drink his morning coffee. Marcus, she said softly, her hand resting on her still flat belly, we're going to have a baby. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor, but neither of them noticed. Marcus crossed the room in 2 strides and swept Elena into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy with laughter and tears and joy. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday when I went to town for supplies. Elena touched her husband's face, memorizing the wonder in his eyes. We're going to be parents, Marcus. They held each other in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by broken china and filled with dreams of the future they would build together. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their valley in pristine white that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. 8 months later, Sarah Isabella Stone made her entrance into the world during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and sent the cattle huddling together in the pasture. Elena labored for 12 hours with Mrs. Martinez coaching her through each contraction, while Marcus paced the kitchen like a caged wolf. When the baby's first cry filled the house, Marcus burst through the bedroom door, with tears streaming down his face. In Elena's arms, wrapped in one of Isabella's carefully preserved quilts, was the most perfect thing he had ever seen, a daughter with dark hair and lungs strong enough to announce her presence to the entire valley. Sarah for new beginnings, Elena whispered, stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek, and Isabella for the woman who prepared the way for all of this. Marcus sank into the chair beside the bed, his work-rough hands trembling as he touched his daughter's tiny fingers. When she wrapped her whole fist around his thumb, he looked like a man who had just been handed the keys to heaven. Hello, little one, he whispered. Welcome to your world. The years that followed passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first steps, and the daily miracle of watching a tiny person become herself. Sarah was walking by 10 months, talking by 18 months, and asking questions that kept her parents on their toes from dawn to dusk. She had Elena's stubborn determination and Marcus's adventurous spirit, which made for some interesting days on the ranch. Elena learned to nurse a baby while reviewing account books, to cook dinner with a toddler clinging to her skirts, and to function on 3 hours of sleep as if it were perfectly normal. Marcus discovered that fatherhood meant having tiny clothes mixed in with the cattle equipment and finding toy horses in his saddlebags, but also a love so fierce it sometimes left him breathless. By Sarah's 3rd birthday, the Stone Creek Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. Elena's innovative approach to bookkeeping and marketing had opened new buyers for their cattle, while Marcus's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock brought customers from hundreds of miles away. They had expanded the house to include a proper nursery and a parlor big enough for the neighbors who stopped by regularly, drawn by Elena's hospitality and the couple's willingness to help anyone in need. The morning that would prove how far Elena had traveled from her old life arrived on a Tuesday in September, when a familiar carriage rolled up their drive carrying a passenger Elena hadn't seen in 5 years. "Hello, sister," said a cultured voice from Philadelphia. "I've come to see if the rumors are true." Elena stood on her porch, holding Sarah on her hip, wearing a simple cotton dress she had sewn herself and boots that were scuffed from honest work. She looked at Victoria Rosewood, still perfectly dressed and perfectly proper and perfectly miserable, and felt nothing but compassion. "What rumors would those be?" Elena asked calmly. Victoria struggled with the words as if they tasted foreign in her mouth. "That you've actually made something of yourself out here in this wilderness. That you're happy." Elena looked around at the life she had built, the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows beside Isabella's climbing roses, the barn where her daughter would learn to ride, the husband who loved her for exactly who she was, the community that valued her contributions, the work that filled her days with purpose and satisfaction. "I am," she said simply. "I really am." Victoria stayed for 3 days, and Elena watched her sister discover what it meant to live in a place where worth was measured by contribution rather than connections, where neighbors helped each other without expecting anything in return, where children played in the dirt and no one worried about stained clothes. On the last morning, as Victoria prepared to leave, she pulled Elena aside with tears in her eyes. "I always thought you made a terrible mistake when you left Philadelphia," she said quietly. "I thought you'd thrown your life away for pride and stubbornness. But seeing you here, seeing what you've built, I think maybe I'm the one who made the mistake." "It's not too late," Elena said gently. "You could start over too if you wanted to. You could choose something different." But Victoria just shook her head, climbing back into her carriage with a sad smile. "I'm not as brave as you are, Elena. I never was." As the carriage disappeared down the mountain road, Elena felt a deep peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She had spent so many years trying to be the person other people want her to be that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be herself. Now standing in the afternoon sunshine with her daughter babbling happily in her arms and her husband whistling as he worked in the barn, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Sarah fell asleep in Elena's lap, and Marcus reached over to take her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question he asked every year on their wedding anniversary. Elena looked at the life spread out before them, messy and imperfect, and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined when she had stepped off that train in Cedar Falls with 17 cents and a broken heart. "Only one," she said, smiling as a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky. "I regret that it took me so long to learn that the only approval I needed was my own." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and wildflowers and the promise of tomorrow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, not a lonely sound, but the voice of the wild country calling to others of its kind, reminding them that home was wherever you chose to make it, and family was whoever you chose to love. In the end, Elena had learned that happiness wasn't something you found lying around waiting to be discovered. It was something you built with your own hands, one choice at a time, with courage enough to choose yourself and love enough to share that choice with others. And that was worth more than all the approval in the world. Thank you so much for joining Elena on her incredible journey from the drawing rooms of Philadelphia to the wide open spaces of Montana Territory. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most devastating setbacks can become the doorways to our greatest adventures. What did you think of Elena's transformation? Could you feel her growing stronger with each challenge she faced? I'd love to know which moment in her story resonated most with you. Was it when she first stood up to Victor, when she found her courage in Judge Carter's makeshift courtroom, or perhaps when she finally found the happiness she deserved with Marcus and little Sarah? Stories like Elena's show us that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and true love over mere security. Her journey from 17 cents and a broken heart to a life filled with purpose and joy proves that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly worth. Please let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Are you listening from a bustling city like Elena's Philadelphia? Or perhaps from wide open country like her Montana Valley? I always love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing how these stories of courage and transformation speak to your own experiences. If Elena's story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more tales of brave souls who dared to rewrite their destinies. Sometimes we all need reminding that no matter how dark the moment, a new chapter can always begin with the simple decision to choose ourselves. Until next time, remember, your story is still being written and you hold the pen.